Since the beginning, I've been Victoria. It's been difficult for me and my mother-in-law to get along. It's always been her style to make me feel unwelcome and that I wouldn't make a good companion for her kid. When my spouse and I decided to buy our first house together, with him making a partial financial contribution, this stress only increased. My mother-in-law would not stop criticizing my decorating decisions. She even went so far as to give us decorations that were too edgy for our tastes. Her tactics proceeded to trying to sow discord between my husband and myself by telling him lies about things I never said or done, knowing how much I yearned for a gorgeous living space. I was hurt, but I made the decision to trust that things would work themselves out on their own in due course. But eventually, I realized that I had to stand up for my dignity. I invited her over for supper in an effort to patch things up and try to forget our difficult history. Taking my husband's suggestions and making a meal I knew she would love took a lot of work. She, regrettably, ate very little and was critical of the cuisine from the beginning, drawing comparisons between it and stuff that one wouldn't feed animals and implying that I was not a competent chef. Her attitude was contemptuous and disparaging, even after I made an effort to patch things up and clarified that the dinner was intended to be a show of goodwill rather than a demonstration of culinary prowess. Throughout the evening, she insulted me, implying that being married to her son wasn't remarkable enough by her standards. Her incessant criticism of others exacerbated the situation and made the dinner uncomfortable for all of them. Sadly, my spouse did not stand with me during these times. Instead, he remained impartial and said that the women should handle this on their own. In my own household, I felt alone and dismissed because of this lack of support. This event made it clear how difficult it continues to be for me to manage my relationship with my mother-in-law and how important it is to have understanding, support, and maybe even limits in order to preserve my dignity and well-being in this family. Dynamic when things are going well. Brian frequently insisted that I ignore the problems and excuse his mother. My aunt's birthday celebration comes to mind. She turned her basement into an art studio where we could paint while sipping wine and nibbles, a beautiful idea designed to promote happiness and relaxation. But when my mother-in-law, my archenemy, unexpectedly showed up, the mood changed. "Happy birthday, Auntie! This setup is amazing. It's a genius idea to combine painting with wine," I said, really becoming thrilled about the theme of the evening. "It's just something to help everyone relax and enjoy themselves," she said, appreciating my response. "Thank you, dear." But when I found out that my mother-in-law was there, I became less excited. "I'm pretty shocked to see Diana here," I said. My aunt, conscious of my unease around Diana, who frequently treated me with thinly veiled disdain, said, "Oh, I get along well. I adore her sense of style." Apologies for not mentioning, I invited her. "I know there's been tension, but I hope this might be a step towards mending fences. After all, she's family." My aunt offered some consolation by saying, "I sigh. She can make things so difficult with her attitude. I understand. Just try to enjoy the evening and not let her bother you." After enjoying a little too much wine, my mother-in-law, dressed in an eye-catching and slightly inappropriate shirt, accidentally splattered paint on herself, turning the evening into a disastrous one. Reluctantly, I helped my mom and aunt clean up after them since I didn't want to leave my mother alone to deal with Diana. I heard someone talking about how my husband's former rival in school, Gabriel, was seeing my mother-in-law on a romantic level. My husband, Brian, was well aware that Gabriel had a history of mistreating me. There was an additional element of difficulty and unease when Diana brags about Gabriel's makeover and extravagant treatment of her while being aware of Brian's affections for him. Unaware of this development, Brian would surely be disappointed to hear the news. Diana's hostility towards me was heightened by my discussion with her over Gabriel, which further strained our already strained relationship. I felt alone because Brian would not face his mother or stand up for me in these circumstances. I made the decision that we should have an open conversation with Diana because I was determined to stand up for myself and deal with the problems head-on. It was obvious that I could not afford to wait for Brian to speak out for me. I decided to take these issues head-on and try to find a way to get past them or set some limits so that I could maintain my dignity and peace in the family. I've frequently mentioned to Brian during our talks that it seems like he's making an intentional attempt to sow division between us, a charge he consistently refutes. "What do you mean?" "I've never done anything of the sort," he'd reply. However, the data is very clear. Consider the evening when he hardly spoke during the dinner I made, preferring to interject petty critiques into his sparse speech. He would ignore everything, saying, "Oh, that. I just wasn't feeling well," and write off his actions as insignificant. Then there was the day he chose to wear a very skimpy shirt to my aunt's party, got very drunk, and spilled paint all over himself, creating a scene so messed up my mom and aunt had to clean up after him. He would downplay the episode, acting as though it had no deeper significance, insisting that it was an innocent mistake. Not to be forgotten is the issue of Gabriel, Brian's boyhood rival who is currently in a love relationship with him. Knowing that Brian despises Gabriel, I find it puzzling that he would choose to spend his time with someone who has given him so much agony in the past. He would say things like, "Gabriel is a changed person, and Brian should move past old grievances," failing to recognize the tension such kind of relationship-damaging associations may cause. I've even gone so far as to issue him with a warning: either he tells Brian about this relationship on his own, or I will tell him myself. As these problems mount, it appears more and more impossible to have a happy marriage because there is a larger pattern of disdain and distance in our union. This was further illustrated by an especially telling phone conversation that revealed Brian's overall lack of interest in our shared existence. Living with Brian has come to feel like sharing a home with someone who is completely cut off from the day-to-day activities of our family. He ignores his domestic duties and makes few contributions to our common life, preferring to pass his days in idle pleasure. He doesn't care about our relationship either. I frequently feel alone in our relationship because he brushes off my worries and feelings. Requests for ordinary help around the house, like doing the dishes, are a clear indication of this disengagement because they are answered with resistance and justifications. He would respond, "I have other things to do," or "I'm busy," even if there was obvious proof to the contrary. Despite my substantial financial contribution to our home and living expenses, he bizarrely demands rent from me for using the basement as my workplace. I became really frustrated with this relationship, which led to a confrontation when I told him how much I disliked his entitlement, laziness, and inability to address his overbearing mother. It has been harder to envision a future with him due to his actions and the ongoing conflicts, which is further highlighted by our deepening awareness of our differences. It's becoming more and more obvious that Brian depends on my efforts. Because of my senior special position in the company, I am able to work long hours, up to 13 hours a day, from the comfort of our home. Even though I paid cash for our house, I've been working out of the basement. Brian, though, is adamant about handling it like a rental from me. I've been driven to my breaking point by this arrangement, among other things. I admitted that I had reached my breaking point, venting my annoyance at his lack of participation in home tasks and his mother's continual meddling in our lives. I said, hoping that Brian would finally understand me, "You need to take a stand, both for me and by making more contributions to our home. Without change, I can't dismiss the idea of divorce." However, he remained silent and then withdrew to complain to his mother, who would then become enraged with me, making matters worse. The situation became more tense when my mother-in-law, emboldened by her son's complaints, threw divorce papers at me in a degrading way. Claiming that "you're causing too much harm to my son and your marriage," she rejected any justification or empathy. With a tone full of scorn, she said, "Get these documents ready with your signature by tomorrow. I won't tolerate any resistance from someone as worthless as you." Then, gloating over the power she felt she had at that very moment, she teased me about going to live with them for the summer. With a strong sense of resolve and an awareness of the dynamics at play, I shot back, "It seems you've overlooked the reality of our situation. Brian's lifestyle, the gifts, and the vacations are all funded by my hard work and earnings, so don't presume your position is untouchable." My words were intended to highlight the need for a major change in our current situation as well as to highlight the contributions I've made and the unsustainable nature of their expectations, challenging the narrative she attempted to impose. I made it obvious in a confrontation full of revelations that I paid for. Their lifestyle, including the expensive gifts and the automobile. "You're mistaken," my mother-in-law said, not believing how much I had helped. "Brian has been dependent on my income and the so-called rent he charges me for using my own space. His lethargy has reached a point where it's unbearable," I stated, my tolerance beginning to wane. Her incredulity was evident. She protested that Brian, my son, would never live off someone else, unable to acknowledge the truth of our predicament. I answered, my determination growing, "I've been too kind, and both of you have taken advantage of that kindness. You're both draining me, and it's time for a change." Brian also surfaced, trying to play on my devotion, but it was too late. It was evident to me that his and his mother's existing views would never allow me to fulfill my dreams of a family and a peaceful home life, so I made my decision. I resisted additional manipulation by standing my ground with a heavy heart but a clear head. With the paperwork in hand, I left with a clear understanding of the seriousness of my choice as well as the serenity and dignity it would bring back into my life. The reality of a poisonous home I knew I had to leave behind seemed to cloud my hope of a loving, caring family, making it seem farther away than ever. I contacted my mother and aunt, the three people who have always been my rock, when I reached my lowest moment. I wanted someone to listen to me complain about how unhelpful Brian was and how controlling Diana was. "I feel so overwhelmed by the situation at home that I just don't know what to do anymore," I admitted. I described how I shoulder the financial burden, even paying the rent on my own home, while Brian idles away his days, not bothering to contribute to the household or make any effort to earn him pocket money. I've tried to talk to him about it, but his lack of effort and defensiveness have made me feel alone and powerless in our union. "It's utterly unjust to you, Victoria," my mother said, realizing the severity of my difficulties. I felt a little more resolute after saying, "He should be doing his part, especially considering how hard you work." I decided to speak with Brian again in the hopes of reaching an understanding. But when I got back home, there were voicemails from Diana begging me not to leave, and then there were Brian's cruel and condescending comments. He also mentioned Diana's recent romance with my former adversary, Gabriel, and said that I had been longing for a divorce. His remarks hurt, particularly when he repeated his mother's opinion that I wasn't worthy of him. I responded, pointing out his ongoing unemployment and lack of self-care, which only served to emphasize the discrepancy in our efforts and contributions. The absurdity of his stance shocked me. "Not good enough? Have you ever looked at yourself lately?" Brian's expression conveyed a mixture of defiance and realization. Seemingly, he perceived the possibility of divorce as a ploy to expose his shortcomings. But such games were not for me. Declaring with firmness my choice, "This is insanity," I told him what I had discussed with my lawyer and that I planned to move forward with the divorce. I hurled the divorce decree at him, along with his half of the cellar. I refused to sign the divorce papers and kept my ground, leaving both Diana and him in shock. Brian's predatory behavior left me with no alternative but to threaten to sue both him and his mother. Still failing to realize the gravity of his acts, he questioned, "What about us, our life together?" "Good luck," I said, my resolution unwavering despite my heavy heart. Brian's complaints that none of this was fair to him reverberated emptily behind me as I closed this chapter of my life. "I hope you manage, but don't ever contact me again. You need to leave by tonight." I had to make a difficult but vital decision in order to recover my independence and dignity after going through such a toxic scenario. Regaining my peace of mind and independence was greatly aided by my decision to part ways with Brian and his mother, Diana. Even though Diana begged me to think again and made dramatic pleas, I knew I had to remove myself from their negativity. The Brian I had once dreamed of was not at all the guy I had imagined him to be. It was long overdue for me to close a turbulent chapter in my life and start a new one after making the difficult decision to let them go. Throughout the journey, there were times when I felt guilty and introspective because I had spent years in a relationship that did nothing but break my spirit. However, the will to never again allow myself to be taken advantage of was what drove me to choose a different course. Following their departure, I set out on a path of personal growth and self-discovery. After moving to a new city, I bought a house that stood for a new beginning. In my professional life, I started a business marketing company from the bottom up, working with former colleagues. Despite its difficulties, this endeavor was fruitful and suggested fresh starts as well as room for expansion. "Bobby, I sincerely appreciate your help," I said to a coworker, my voice full of excitement. "The future looks promising, and I'm keen on exploring expansion opportunities for the firm." The adoption of a son, a source of joy and direction, also added to the richness of my life. Our time together at the park, basking in the sun, has redefined happiness for me. But there was a faint echo of my former life with Brian and Diana. The odd call from Diana, filled with requests for financial assistance, served as a sharp reminder of the life I had abandoned. "You and Brian are in charge of your own lives," I declared, certain in my choice to cut off financial relations. Even though it is regrettable, their struggles are the result of their decisions and actions, not mine. Diana tried to make me feel better by telling about their terrible circumstances, including Gabriel's abandonment, but I was unmoved. I responded, "I've moved past our history, and while I wish you no ill, I cannot be your safety net," capping a chapter full of deceit and broken promises. Now, far from the chaos of the past, my attention was firmly fixed on the future, on my son, and on the life we were creating together. Instead of reacting angrily and setting a bad example for my son, I chose to give Diana an opportunity to speak. She revealed a recent exchange she had with Gabriel, which just strengthened my resolve to stop letting her machinations influence me. Diana, needing some comfort, asked, "Gabriel, you've been distant. What's wrong?" Gabriel came clean and said, "Diana, I can't keep being your ATM. I thought there was more to us, but I can't ignore the truth any longer." Diana asked, shocked, "You mean our happiness was a lie?" looking for evidence of the love she thought they had. Gabriel shattered Diana's fantasies with a harsh confession, "Frankly, yes. I was in it for the money, hoping to gain access to Victoria's inheritance. It's clear now that marrying you won't bring me any closer to that. You and Brian are just dead ends." Diana was devastated by his harsh remarks, characterizing her as elderly and a financial burden because of her health problems. Gabriel made it apparent that he valued his money more than their relationship, even in the face of her cries for understanding. I was somewhat relieved and sympathetic at hearing this, but I didn't waver in my resolve to sever all connections. I ended the call and stopped her from contacting me again. "It's unfortunate, Diana, but you must take responsibility for your choices. Don't contact us again. Good luck with everything, and I hope Brian finds his footing," I replied. Subsequently, I discovered that Brian had indeed secured a job as a custodian, a position that, although truthful, highlighted the severe financial difficulties he faced. I didn't feel sorry for him if he was having financial difficulties because of how he had taken advantage of my kindness in the past. As things continued to worsen for Diana and Brian, they took sanctuary in a shelter, and Brian was eventually made to live beneath a bridge. Diana was able to get a place in the shelter because of her age. Even though their situation was dire, I was focused on creating a better future for myself and my baby. We left behind the house connected to so many difficult memories and moved into a new one. Our new house, with its large yard and pool, is the much-needed resettlement. Signing on new clients and enjoying our time swimming and playing in the yard, my kid and I have discovered happiness and tranquility, a dramatic contrast to the difficult years now behind us.